Welcome back to Liberty Readers, and I am Candy, the storybook lady. We're reading right now The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And last week we started off. And does anybody remember what happened last week at all? Do you remember how many children we met last week? That's right, there were 4 kids. And what were their names? That's right, it was Peter, Susan, Lucy, and Edmund. And what in particular had happened to Lucy? Does anyone recall? Precisely. Lucy, while playing hide and go seek, hid in a wardrobe and found herself in a whole new world where she met a faun and she had tea with him and learned that he actually had a bad plan to kidnap her and take her to an evil queen. And so that was something different, and thankfully the faun had a change of heart and helped Lucy escape to safety. But when Lucy got back, did her brothers and sisters believe her? No, they didn't, and that made Lucy quite a bit upset. Okay, so we left off with the children playing hide and seek again, and Edmund, one of the other children, finding himself in the middle of a wood. So now we have to think, is Edmund going to believe Lucy? Do you think he'll help her tell the truth to the other brothers and sisters, or will they find out about the wardrobe? I don't know. So let's find out. Let's read some more today. So, there was crisp, dry snow under his feet, and more snow lying on the branches of the trees. Overhead, there was a pale blue sky, the sort of sky one sees on a fine winter day in the morning. Straight ahead of him, he saw between the tree trunks the sun, just rising, very red and clear. Everything was perfectly still, as if he were the only living creature in that country. There was not even a robin or a squirrel among the trees, and the wood stretched as far as he could see in every direction. He shivered. He now remembered that he had been looking for Lucy, and also how unpleasant he had been to find out about her, quote, imaginary country, which now turned out not to have been imaginary at all. He thought she might be somewhere quite close, and so he shouted, "Lucy! Lucy! I'm here too! Edmund!" There was no answer. She's angry about all the things I've been saying lately, thought Edmund. And though he did not like to admit that he'd been wrong, he also did not much like being alone in this strange, cold, quiet place. So he shouted again, "I say, Lou, I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I see now you were right all along. Do come out. Make it, Pax." Still there was no answer. "Just like a girl," said Edmund to himself. "Sulking somewhere, won't accept an apology." He looked round him again and decided he did not much like this place, and had almost made up his mind to go home when he heard, very far off in the wood, a sound of bells. He listened, and the sound came nearer and nearer, and at last there swept into sight a sledge drawn by 2 reindeer. The reindeer were about the size of Shetland ponies, and their hair was so white that even the snow hardly looked white compared with them. Their branching horns were gilded and shone like something on fire when the sunrise caught them. Their harness was of scarlet leather and covered with bells. On the sledge, driving the reindeer, sat a fat dwarf who would have been about 3 feet high if he had been standing. He was dressed in polar bear's fur, and on his head he wore a red hood with a long gold tassel hanging down from its point. Its huge beard covered his knees and served him instead of a rug. But behind him, on a much higher seat in the middle of the sledge, sat a very different person. A great lady, taller than any woman that Edmund had ever seen. She also was covered in white fur up to her throat and held a long, straight golden wand in her right hand and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white like snow or paper or icing sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and stern. The sledge was a fine sight as it came sweeping toward Edmund with the bells jingling and the dwarf cracking his whip and the snow flying up on each side of it. "Stop," said the lady, and the dwarf pulled the reindeer up so hard that they almost sat down. Then they recovered themselves and stood champing at their bits and blowing. In the frosty air, the breath came out of their nostrils, looked like smoke. "And what, pray, are you?" said the lady, looking hard at Edmund. My name's Edmund," said Edmund rather awkwardly. He did not like the way she looked at him. And we have a photo. There's Edmund and the woman. The lady frowned. "Is that how you address a queen?" she asked, looking sterner than ever. "I beg your pardon, your majesty. I didn't know," said Edmund. "Not know of the Queen of Narnia?" cried she. "Ha! You shall know us better hereafter, but I repeat, what are you?" "Please, your majesty," said Edmund, "I don't know what you mean. I'm at school. At least I was. It's the holidays now." Chapter 4. Turkish Delight. "But what are you?" said the queen again. "Are you a great overgrown dwarf that has cut off its beard?" "No, your majesty," said Edmund. "I never had a beard. I'm a boy." "A boy," said she. "Do you mean you are a son of Adam?" Edmund stood still, saying nothing. He was too confused by this time to understand what the question meant. "I see you are an idiot, whatever else you may be," said the queen. "Answer me, once and for all, or I shall lose my patience. Are you human?" "Yes, your majesty," said Edmund. "And how, pray, did you come to enter my dominions?" "Please, your majesty, I came through a wardrobe." "A wardrobe? What do you mean?" I opened a door and just found myself here, your majesty," said Edmund. "Ha!" said the queen, speaking more to herself than to him. "A door. A door from the world of men. I have heard of such things. This may wreck all. But he's only one, and he's easily dealt with." As she spoke these words, she rose from her seat and looked Edmund full in the face, her eyes flaming. At the same moment she raised her wand. Edmund felt sure she was going to do something dreadful, but he seemed unable to move. Then, just as he gave himself up for lost, she appeared to change her mind. "My poor child," she said in quite a different voice. "How cold you look. Come and sit with me here on the sledge, and I will put my mantle around you, and we will talk." Edmund did not like this arrangement at all, but he dared not disobey. He stepped onto the sledge and sat at her feet, and she put a fold of her fur mantle around him and tucked it in well. "Perhaps something hot to drink?" said the queen. "Should you like that?" "Yes, please, your majesty," said Edmund, whose teeth were chattering. The queen took from somewhere among her wrappings a very small bottle, which looked as if it was made of copper. Then, holding out her arm, She let one drop fall from it onto the snow beside the sledge. Edmund saw the drop for a second in mid-air, shining like a diamond, but the moment it touched the snow, there was a hissing sound, and there stood a jeweled cup full of something that steamed. The dwarf immediately took this and handed it to Edmund with a bow and a smile. Not a very nice smile. Edmund felt much better as he began to sip the hot drink. It was something he had never tasted before. Very sweet and foamy and creamy, and it warmed him right down to his toes. "It is dull, son of Adam, to drink without eating," said the queen pleasantly. "What would you like best to eat?" "Turkish delight, please, your majesty," said Edmund. The queen let another drop fall from her bottle onto the snow, and instantly there appeared a round box, tied with a green silk ribbon, which, when opened, turned out to contain several pounds of the best Turkish delight. Each piece was sweet and light to the very center, and Edmund had never tasted anything more delicious. He was quite warm now, and very comfortable. While he was eating, the queen kept asking him questions. At first, Edmund tried to remember that it is rude to speak with one's mouth full, but soon he forgot about this and thought only of trying to shovel down as much Turkish delight as he could, and the more he ate, the more he wanted to eat, and he never asked himself why the queen should be so inquisitive. She got him to tell her that he had one brother and two sisters, and that one of his sisters had already been in Narnia and had met a faun there, and that no one except himself and his brother and his sisters knew anything about Narnia. She seemed especially interested in the fact that there were four of them, and kept coming back to it. "You are sure there are just four of you?" she said. "Two sons of Adam and two daughters of Eve, neither more nor less?" And Edmund, with his mouth full of Turkish delight, kept on saying, "Yes, I told you that before," and forgetting to call her your majesty, but she didn't seem to mind now. At last the Turkish delight was all finished, and Edmund was looking very hard at the empty box, and wishing that she would ask him whether he would like some more. Probably the queen knew quite well what he was thinking, for she knew, though Edmund did not, that this was enchanted Turkish delight, and that anyone who had once tasted it would want more and more of it, and would, even if they were allowed, go on eating it till they killed themselves. But she did not offer him any more. Instead, she said to him, "Son of Adam, I should so much like to see your brother and your two sisters. Will you bring them to see me?" "I'll try," said Edmund, still looking at the empty box. "Because if you did come again, bringing them with you, of course, I'd be able to give you some more Turkish delight. I can't do it now. The magic will only work once. In my own house, it would be another matter." "Why can't we go to your house now?" said Edmund. When he had first got into the sledge, he had been very afraid she might drive away with him to some unknown place from which he would not be able to get back. But he had forgotten about that fear now. "It is a lovely place, my house," said the queen. "I am sure you would like it. There are whole rooms full of Turkish delight, and, what's more, I have no children of my own. I want a nice boy whom I could bring up as a prince, and who would be king of Narnia when I am gone. While he was prince, he would wear a gold crown and eat Turkish delight all day long. And you are much the cleverest and handsomest young man I've ever met. I think I would like to make you the prince someday, when you bring the others to visit me." "Why not now?" said Edmund. His face had become very red, and his mouth and fingers were sticky. He did not look either clever or handsome, whatever the queen might say. "Oh, but if I took you there now," said she, "I shouldn't see your brother and sisters. I very much want to know your charming relations. You are to be the prince and, later on, the king. That is understood. But you must have the courtiers and nobles, I will make your brother a duke and your sisters duchesses." "There's nothing special about them," said Edmund. "And anyway, I could always bring them some other time." "Ah, but once you were in my house," said the Queen, "you might forget all about them. You would be enjoying yourself so much that you wouldn't want to you wouldn't want the bother of going to fetch them. No, you must go back to your own country now, and come to me another day, with them, you understand. It is no good coming without them." "But I don't even know the way back to my own country," pleaded Edmund. "That's easy," said the Queen. "Do you see that lamp?" She pointed with her wand, and Edmund turned and saw the same lamp post under which Lucy had met the fawn. "Straight on beyond that is the way to the world of men. And now, look the other way." Here she pointed in the opposite direction. "And tell me if you can see two little hills rising above the trees." "I think I can," said Edmund. "Well, my house is between those two hills. So next time you come, you have only to find the lamp post and look for those two hills and walk through the wood till you reach my house. But remember, you must bring the others with you. I might have to be very angry with you if you came alone." "I'll do my best," said Edmund. "And, by the way," said the Queen, "you needn't tell them about me. It would be fun to keep it a secret between us two, wouldn't it? Make it a surprise for them. Just bring them along to the two hills. A clever boy like you will easily think of some excuse for doing that. And when you come to my house, you could just say, 'Let's see who lives here,' or something like that. I am sure that would be best. If your sister has met one of the fawns, she may have heard some strange stories about me. Nasty stories that make her afraid to come to me. Fawns will say anything, you know. And now, please," said Edmund suddenly, "please, couldn't I just have one piece of Turkish delight to eat on the way home?" No, said the Queen with a laugh. "You must wait until next time." While she spoke, she signaled to the dwarf to drive on. But as the sledge swept away out of sight, the Queen waved to Edmund, calling out, Next time, don't forget, come soon." Edmund was still staring after the sledge when he heard someone calling his own name, and looking round, he saw Lucy coming toward him from another part of the wood. "Oh, Edmund!" she cried. "So you've got him too! Isn't it wonderful? And now—" "All right," said Edmund. "I see you were right, and it's a magic wardrobe after all. I'll say I'm sorry if you like, but where on earth have you been all this time? I've been looking for you everywhere." "If I had known you'd gotten in, I'd have waited for you," said Lucy, who was too happy and excited to notice how snappishly Edmund spoke, or how flushed and strange his face was. "I've been having lunch with dear Mr. Tumnus the Fawn, and he's very well, and the White Witch has done nothing to him for letting me go, so he thinks she can't have found out, and perhaps everything is going to be all right after all." "The White Witch?" said Edmund. "Who's she?" "She's a perfectly terrible person," said Lucy. "She calls herself the Queen of Narnia, though she has no right to be queen at all. And all the fauns and dryads and naiads and dwarfs and animals, at least all the good ones, simply hate her. And she can turn people into stone and do all kinds of horrible things. And she has made a magic so that is always winter in Narnia. Always winter, but it never gets to Christmas. And she drives about on a sledge drawn by reindeer with her wand in her hand and a crown on her head." Edmund was already feeling uncomfortable from having eaten too many sweets, and when he heard that the lady he had made friends with was a dangerous witch, he felt even more uncomfortable. But he still wanted to taste that Turkish delight again, more than he wanted anything else. "Who told you all that stuff about the White Witch?" he asked. "Mr. Tumnus, the Fawn," said Lucy. "You can't always believe what a fawn says." said Edmund, trying to sound as if he knew far more about them than Lucy. Who said so? Said Lucy. Everyone knows it, said Edmund. Ask anybody you like, but it's pretty poor sport standing here in the snow. Let's go home. Yes, let's, said Lucy. Oh, Edmund, I am glad you've got into. The others will have to believe in Narnia now that both of us has been here. What fun it will be! But Edmund secretly thought that it would not be as good fun for him as for her. He would have to admit that Lucy had been right before all the others, and he felt sure the others would all be on the side of the fawns and the animals. But he was already more than half on the side of the witch. He didn't know what he would say or how he would keep this secret once they were all talking about Narnia. By this time they had walked a good way. Then suddenly they felt coats around them, and instead of branches, Then suddenly they felt coats around them instead of branches, and next moment they were both standing outside the wardrobe in the empty room. I say, said Lucy, you do look awful, Edmund. Don't you feel well? I'm all right, said Edmund, but this was not true. He was feeling very sick. Come on then, said Lucy. Let's find the others. What a lot we shall have to tell them. And what wonderful adventures we shall have now that we're all in it together. Chapter 5. Back on this side of the door. Because the game of hide and seek was still going on, it took Edmund and Lucy some time to find the others. But when at last they were all together, which happened in the long room where the suit of armor was, Lucy burst out, Peter, Susan, it's all true. Edmund has seen it too. There is a country you can get to through the wardrobe. Edmund and I both got in. We met one another in there, in the wood. Go on, Edmund. Tell them all about it. What's all this about, Ed? Said Peter. And now we come to one of the nastiest things in this story. Up to that moment, Edmund had been feeling sick and sulky and annoyed with Lucy for being right, but he hadn't made up his mind what to do. When Peter suddenly asked him the question, he decided all at once to do the meanest and most spiteful thing he could think of. He decided to let Lucy down. Tell us, Ed, said Susan. And Edmund gave a very superior look, as if he were far older than Lucy. There was really only a year's difference. And then a little snigger and said, Oh, yes, Lucy and I have been playing, pretending that all her story about the country and the wardrobe is true. Just for fun, of course. There's nothing there, really. Poor Lucy gave Edmund one look and rushed out of the room. Edmund, who was becoming a nastier person every minute, thought that he had scored a great success and went on at once to say, There she goes again. What's the matter with her? That's the worst of the young kids. They always... Look here, said Peter, turning on him savagely. Shut up. You've been perfectly beastly to Lou ever since she started this nonsense about the wardrobe, and now you go playing games with her about it and setting her off again? I believe you did it simply out of spite. But it's all nonsense, said Edmund, very taken aback. Of course it's all nonsense, said Peter. That's just the point. Lou was perfectly all right when we left home, but since we've been down here, she seems to be either going queer in the head or else turning into a most frightful liar. But whichever it is, what good do you think you'll do by jeering her and nagging at her one day and encouraging her the next? I thought, said Edmund, but he couldn't think of anything to say. You didn't think anything at all, said Peter. It's just spite. You've always liked being beastly to anyone smaller than yourself. We've seen that at school before now. Do stop it, said Susan. It won't make things any better having a row between you two. Let's go find Lucy. It was not surprising that when they found Lucy a good deal later. Everyone could see that she had been crying. Nothing they could say to her made any difference. She stuck to her story and said, I don't care what you think, and I don't care what you say. You can tell the professor, or you can You can tell the professor, or you can write to Mother, or you can do anything you like. I know I've met a fawn in there, and I wish I'd stay there, and you're all beast. Beast. It was an unpleasant evening. Lucy was miserable, and Edmund was beginning to feel that his plan wasn't working as well as he'd expected. The two older ones were really beginning to think that Lucy was out of her mind. They stood in the passage, talking about it in whispers, long after she had gone to bed. The result was the next morning they decided that they would really go and tell the whole thing to the professor. "He'll write to Father if he thinks there's really something wrong with Lou," said Peter. "It's getting beyond us." So they went and knocked at the study door, and the professor said, "Come in," and got up and found chairs for them, and said he was quite at their disposal. Then he sat listening to them with the tips of his fingers pressed together, never interrupting, till they had finished the whole story. After that he said nothing for quite a long time. Then he cleared his throat and said the last thing either of them expected. "How do you know," he asked, "that your sister's story is not true?" "Oh, but," began Susan, and then stopped. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious. Then Susan pulled herself together and said, "But Edmund said they had only been pretending." "That is the point," said the professor, "which certainly deserves consideration. Very careful consideration. For instance, if you'll excuse me for asking the question, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as more reliable? I mean, which is the more truthful?" "That's just the funny thing about it, sir," said Peter. "Up till now, I'd have said Lucy every time." "And what do you think, my dear?" said the professor, turning to Susan. "Well," said Susan, "in general, I'd say the same as Peter, but this couldn't be true. All this about the wood and the fawn?" "That is more than I know," said the professor. "And a charge of lying against someone whom you've always found to be truthful is a very serious thing. A very serious thing indeed." "We were afraid it mightn't even be lying," said Susan. "We thought there might be something wrong with Lucy." "Madness, you mean?" said the professor quite coolly. "Oh, you can make your minds easy about that. One only has to look at her and talk to her to see that she's not mad." "But then," said Susan, and stopped. She had never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the professor and didn't know what to think. "Logic," said the professor half to himself. "Why don't they teach logic at these schools? There are only three possibilities. Either your sister is telling lies, or she is mad, or she is telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it is obvious that she is not mad. For the moment, then, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume that she is telling the truth." Susan looked at him very hard, and was quite sure from the expression on his face that he was not making fun of them. "But how could it be true, sir?" said Peter. "Why do you say that?" asked the professor. "Well, for one thing," said Peter, "if it was real, why doesn't everyone find this country every time they go in the wardrobe? I mean, there was nothing there when we looked. Even Lucy didn't pretend there was." "What has that to do with it?" said the professor. "Well, sir, if things are real, they're there all the time." "Are they?" said the professor, and Peter did not know quite what to say. "But there was no time," said Susan. "Lucy had no time to have gone anywhere. Even if there was such a place, she came running after us the very moment we were out of the room. It was less than a minute, and she pretended to have been away for hours." "That is the very thing that makes her story so likely to be true," said the professor. "If there really is a door in this house that leads to some other world, and I should warn you that this is a very strange house, and even I know very little about it. If, I say, she had got into another world, I should not be at all surprised to find the other world had a separate time of its own, so that, however long you stayed there, it would never take up any of our time. On the other hand, I don't think many girls of her age would invent that idea for themselves. If she had been pretending, she would have hidden for a reasonable time before coming out and telling her story. But do you really mean, sir, said Peter, that there could be other worlds all over the place, just around the corner? Like that? Nothing is more probable, said the professor, taking off his spectacles and beginning to polish them while he muttered to himself, I wonder what they do teach them at these schools. But what are we to do? Said Susan. She felt that the conversation was beginning to get off the point. My dear young lady, said the professor, suddenly looking up with a very sharp expression at the both of them, there is one plan which no one has yet suggested, and which is well worth trying. What's that? Said Susan. We might all try minding our own business, said he, and that was the end of the conversation. After this, things were a good deal better for Lucy. Peter saw to it that Edmund stopped jeering at her, and neither she nor anyone else felt inclined to talk about the wardrobe at all. It had become a rather alarming subject, and so for a time it looked as if all the adventures were coming to an end. But that was not to be. I'm going to stop there for today. So it sounds like the adventures will continue, but we don't necessarily know how. So what do we think about what happened today? I mean, that was pretty nasty of Edmund to not tell the truth and to make Lucy look like she was even crazier than they already thought she was. And what do you think about Peter and Susan and their response? They're having to struggle with, knowing Lucy to be a truthful person, but having to grapple with her telling the story that doesn't seem quite real. So, let's see what happens next week. Let's see how the adventures continue for the four of them. Thanks for visiting us at Liberty Readers. Look forward to seeing you guys next Sunday.